Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel simply is Discerning What is True. I'm going to be reading from the book here called The World's 16 Crucified Saviors by Kersey Graves. I'm going to be reading chapters 7 and 8. They're very short chapters, that is. So I wanted, it probably wouldn't take maybe 20, 25 minutes or so. But I wanted to basically share this information because it's vital to have it, for you to look into this. So let me get to the point here where we were supposed to be at. So chapter seven's title is simply called Angels, Shepherds, and Magi Visit the Infant Savior. Saviors, I should say. So let me change one other thing here quickly. Okay. In an age when gods and men were on the most familiar terms, and when the character of one furnished a transcript for the other, and when each consented to act as a reciprocal part towards elevating, honoring, and glorifying the other, the birth of a god or Messiah was, as a matter of, course, regarded as an event of sufficient importance to attract the attention of the great ones of the earth, and even the denizens of heaven also. And hence we find it related to the related in the history of several of the God-begotten saviors of antiquity, that as soon as they were born into the world, they were visited by, quote, wise men from a distance, end quote, or magi, as were called by the per, Persians and Brahmins, end quote. And in some cases, they were likewise waited upon and adored by their neighboring shepherds, and even celestial spirits are reported in some instances as leaving their star guild homes to wing their way to the humble mansion, the rude tenement, you would say, containing a newborn God, as capital G, that they might honor and adore the, quote, Savior of man, the Savior of the world, end quote. The sacred biographies of both um, Confucius and Christ furnish some examples of the angels' hosts forsaking their um, golden pavilions. And to the skies to pay their devotees to a deity begotten bannerling sent down by the, quote, fathers of mercy to save a guilt-laden world. And in both cases, the Magi are reported as assembling to present their offerings to the infant God. In the case of Confucius, born in 598 BC, it is declared, quote, five wise men from a distance came to the house. Celestial music was heard in the skies, and angels attended the scene, end quote. And it says, see the 5 volumes here based upon Confucius. Now, let us observe how strikingly similar to this legend or ancient legend in each of the several characteristics in the Christian story. That is Matthew chapter 2, verses 1, speaks of, quote, wise men from the east, end quote. That is journeying to Jerusalem to visit the infant Christ soon after his birth among the mules and oxen in a stable, though he omits to state the number of initiated adorers who presented themselves on the occasion. The Persian story is more specific, as it gets the number of magi who visit the young Savior of that country as 5. Luke 2:13 speaks of, quote, a multitude of the heavenly hosts praising God, end quote, in congratulations of the birth of the Judean Savior. Now, when we bear in mind that one method of praising God with the Orientals was by music, as we will at once observe that this is only another mode of proclaiming, as in the case of Confucius, that, quote, celestial music was heard in the skies, end quote, and, quote, angels attended the scene, end quote, of Confucius' birth. So likewise, Luke chapter 2:15 relays that the angels, after rejoicing with the shepherds on the occasion of the birth of Christ, quote, went away into heaven, end quote. How complete the parallel. And for the digression and monopoly of space, we might trace it much further and show that Confucius, like Christ, had 12 chosen disciples, that he was descended from a royal house of princes, as Christ from the royal house of David, that he, in like manner, retired for a long period from the noise and bustle of society into the religious contemplative um, seclusion that he inculcated the same golden rule of doing to others if we desire them to act towards us, and other moral maxims equal in importance to anything that can be found in the Christian scriptures, etc. But in the line of history, other saviors of birth, we are told, were invited by both angels and shepherds also. Quote, wise men, end quote, at least great men. Krishna, the eighth avatar of India in 1200 BC, so it is related by the, quote, inspired pen man, end quote, of their pagan theocracy, was visited by angels, shepherds, and prophets. And he's got in brackets and avatars. Quote, immediately after his birth, he was visited by a chorus of devats, or what he would call angels, and surrounded by shepherds, all of whom were impressed with the conviction of his future greatness, end quote. We are also informed that gold, frankincense, and myrrh, end quote, were presented to him as offerings. The well-known modern traveler, that is Mr. Dinson, Ditson, who visited India but a few years since, uses the emphatical declaration, quote, in fact, as soon as Krishna was born, he was saluted by a chorus of devas, or angels, end quote, in the evangelical narrative of the Christian Savior. An angel is reported to have saluted his mother thus, quote, hail, thou that art highly favored. The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, end quote. This is based upon Luke chapter 1, verses 28. And in the next chapter, the angel is reported as joining with, quote, the heavenly hosts, end quote, and another quote, end quote, in praising God, end quote. A similar report is found in the Hindu Bible, um, appertaining to the mother of the eighth Savior, of whom it is declared Brahman Asilva, with a host of attending spirits, came to her and sang, quote, in thy delivery, O favored among women, all nations shall have come to exalt, end quote. And when the celestial infant, that is Krishna, appeared, it is in brackets here, it is related in a subsequent chapter, quote, a chorus of heavenly spirits saluted him with hymns. The whole room was illuminated by his light, and the countenance of his father and mother shone with brightness and glory, that is by reflection. Their understandings were opened so that they knew him to be the preserver of the world, and they began to worship him. That is also in a quote there. Sorry. The last text here quoted brings to mind Luke chapter 24, verses 45, which declares, quote, then he, that is speaking of Christ, opened their, that is in parentheses, his parents' understanding, end quote. The ninth avatar of India, that is Saki, furnishes to some extent a similar parallel according to the accounts of an exploration made in India and published in the New York Correspondent of 1828. Quote, there is on a silver plate in a cave in India a inscription stating that about the time of the advent of Buddha, Sakia, around 600 BC, a saint in the woods learned by inspiration that another avatar, or we would call Messiah or Savior, had appeared in the house of Raja of Lailas, spelled Lailas, learning which he flew through the air to the place, and when he beheld the newborn Savior, he declared him to be the great avatar, again, a Savior or prophet, and that he was destined to establish a new religion, end quote. That's based upon the New Covenant religion. We next draw on the history of Greece. It is authentically related of Pythagoras, that is in 600 BC, that his fame having reached Mythlos, a neighboring cities, men renowned for wisdom, that is, wise men, came to visit him. Progress of Religion Ideas, Volume 1, states in the Anacalipus, we are told that Magi came from the east to offer gifts at Socrates' birth, bringing what we call gold, frankincense, and myrrh. End quote. The same kind of offering as that is presented to the two divine infants, that is Krishna and Christ, according to their respective, quote, inspired, end quote, biographies. That is in see Matthew chapter 2, 4, and the Ramayana. And the legend of Mythos or of Persia might also be included in our category of comparison if we had space for it. All the four saviors' last name, if Socrates may be called such, are reported as having been honored and enriched with aromatic offerings at their respective births. And we have the statement from Mr. Higgins that the same assortment of spices, that is being also with gold, constituted the materials offered as gifts to the sun, that's SUN, in Persia more than 3,000 years ago, and likewise in Arabia near the same era. And it may be stated here that an ancient historical account of Zoroaster, Persia, which is 6,000 BC, according to Pliny, Pliny, and Aristotle, speaks of his having also been visited by Magi or Magi, end quote, as the period of his earthly advent. And it is perhaps well to note in this place that Magi, quote unquote, is the term used in the apocalyptic gospels to designate the, quote, wise men, end quote, who visit Christ at birth, and that the Magi, magic and magician, are but variations of the same word, at least derivatives, that is, derivations from the same root, all suggesting a wisdom correlated to the gods. Osiris, an incarnate deity of Egypt. We may cite as another case of an infantile god receiving several honors and eclat at birth, as he was visited while yet in the cradle by a host of admiring adorers. Quote, people flock from all parts of the world to behold the heaven-born infant, end quote, such as a worldwide fame must have had the effects to attract, with the numerous crowd who thronged to see and worship him, no small number of, quote, wise men, end quote. At this stage of our historical exposition, we will suggest it is rather a singular circumstances that the Divine Father, in his infinite wisdom, should have chosen to reveal the intelligence of the birth of his Son, Jesus Christ, to a set of nomadic heathen idolaters, hundreds of miles distance, that is, though known as, quote, wise men, end quote, because of their skill in astrology, before he made it known to his own, quote, chosen people, end quote, that is, the Jews, who had ever regarded themselves as the recipients of his special favors. And perhaps it is still more singular that these pagan pedestrians should have been denominated, that is, wise men, while men of God's own election, according to the Christian Bible, were also stigmatized and denounced as, quote, fools, end quote, a, quote, generation of vipers, end quote, etc. But it so happens that, quote, human reason, end quote, finds many incongruencies in, quote, divine revelations, end quote. Yes, there's been a saying simply as I'll share this with you. Me and Phil talked a little bit about it. That is Langdon. we talked about something, who are the Jews? And he would say simply that these were those who were initiatives, that is, those who were going to be initiated, that is, to in a mystery school, so to speak. So he's not speaking of what we would call a certain quote race. He's talking about, as he understood it, as being um, initiatives to basically to learn more about the deeper things and why we're here. So that's chapter 7. So I'm going to continue on here. Let me take a sip of water, and we'll read chapter 8. And chapter 8's title simply is called The 25th of December, the Birthday of the Gods. Divested of all explanation, the announcement of the fact that the time of the birth of many of the incarnated gods, so this is all times when they say gods, this is the capital G, and saviors of antiquity were fixed at the same period. And this period, the 25th day of December, celebrated all over Christendom as the birthday of Jesus Christ, would sound marvelously strange, especially when it is noticed that this period formally dated the birth of a new year, the birth of what we call King Saul, S-O-L. And when we find that the ancient pagans were in the habit of celebrating this venerated 25th day of December as the birthday of their gods, clue, I'm giving you a hint here, it's a clue, okay? In the same manner, Christians now celebrate is the birthday of Christ. We are driven to admit that something more than mere fortuitous accident must be addressed to account for this uh, coincidence, I should say. According to Dr. Lightfoot, the Temple of Jerusalem was employed in celebrating the birth of a pagan god, Ananias, on the very night Christmas assigned for the birth of Christ. And Robert Taylor informs us that nearly all the nations of the East were once in the habit of rising at midnight to celebrate the birthday of their gods. Again, it's in capital G, on the 25th day of December. And to this statement, Mr. Higgins adds that, quote, at the first moment after midnight of the 24th day of December, the ancient nations celebrate the accouchement of the Queen of Heaven's celestial virgin and the birth of the god Saul, S-O-L, the infant Savior and the God of day. So it goes on here. Bacchus of Egypt, Bacchus of Greece, Ananias of Greece, Krishna of India, Shanti of China, Chris of Chaldea, Mithroth of Persia, Sakia of India, Jan Walpa, that is, quote, in a brackets here, a crucified savior of ancient Britain, were all born on the 25th day of December, according to their respective histories. So Krishna is represented to have been born at midnight on the 25th of the month. So Varana, which answers to our December. And millions of his disciples celebrate his birthday by decorating their houses with garlands and gilt paper and the bestowment of presents to friends. The Reverend Mr. Barrett, spelled B-A-R-R-E-T, tells us, quote, it was once common for the woman in Rome to perambulate the streets on the 25th of December, singing in loud voices, quote, unto us a child is born this day, end quote. So the 25th day of December, that it will be observed, was marked as the birthday of the incarnate gods, saviors, and sons of God of many of the religious systems of antiquity, long prior to the birth of Christ. I bet you many post people who are actually belong in the church don't know this. That's my point. And why his birth was fixed at that date is not hard to account for. According to the celebrated Christian writer, Mr. Goodrich, the Christian world had no chronological and recorded no dates for several centuries after the commencement of the Christian era. See History of All Nations in page 23. So he's basing this upon Mr. Goodrich's book here called "See History of All Nations," page 23. No events of their history was marked by dates for nearly 400 years. Hence, the time of Christ's birth is altogether a matter of conjecture, and is also every other event noticed in the Christian Bible. This is proved by the fact that the ablest Christian writers and chronologicals this differ to the extent of 3,500 years in fixing the time of every event in the Bible. And Mr. Kennedy presents us with what he called 300 different chronological systems by different Christian writers, all founded on the Bible, and proving that the date of his various events are inextricably involved in a labyrinth of doubt, darkness, and uncertainty. Relative to the time of Christ's birth, the quote Encyclopedia Britannica says, quote, Christians count 133 contrary opinions of different authors concerning the year the Messiah appeared on earth. Many of them celebrated writers, end quote. This is by ART. Chronological, I assume, CHRON, abbreviated. Marks the declaration 133 different opinions as to the year Christ was born in, and 133 different years fixed on by different Christian chronologicalists as the time of the birth of the most extraordinary and most noted being, as Christians would have us to believe, that even appeared on earth. Think on omnipotent God descending from heaven, performing astounding miracles and presenting other proofs of being a God, and yet not one of these 300 writers of that era take any notice of him, or make any note of his birth, or any event of his life. This circumstance is of itself sufficient to banish and dissipate all faith in its divinity. It is evident from the facts just presented that all systems of Christian chronologically are founded on moral conjecture, and hence should be rejected as worthless. What event of Christ's life then can be accepted as certain, when no record was made of it till the time was forgotten, and none for at least half a century after the dawn of Christian era, according to Dr. Lardner, Lardner, Larner, when nearly all who witnessed it must have been dead. Yeah, definitely should. We think the most reasonable conclusion of the case is that Christ, instead of performing those Munchausen prodigies attributed to him, such as casting out devils, raising the dead, controlling the elements of nature, etc., led such a ordinary obscure life as selling only and healing the sick and other notable deeds of charity and philanthropy, that he attracted but little notice by the higher classes or by anybody but those of a similar turn of mind, till he was deified by Constantine in the year 325 AD. That is the red flag there, folks. So I pointed this out earlier today. I spoke something. There is no, what is the word? I just lost my thought here. Oh, there is no well-known historian, except one, and it's written very little, writes anything of his accounts. There's no historian. This is how we know that something happened when a historian is in an area of such and such, and these miracles start taking place. He starts writing things down. So and so here, such and such happened, such and such time, and it was on the year such and such, and the day da 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 da. It happened at this particular place, but that's not here, folks. Okay. So again, 325 AD. Hence, the time of his birth was not recorded and was forgotten. Consequently, the 25th day of December was selected as his birthday, because it was the birthday of other gods, and because it was regarded by the heathen from time immemorial as the birthday of Sol, S-O-L, the glorious luminary of heaven, it bringing the period he is born again into a new year and commences again his journey and his life, end quote. And because also this epoch was, as Sharon Turner informs us in his Sharon, I should say, Sharon Turner informs us in his quote, History of the Anglo-Saxons, end quote. The commencement of a new year up to the 10th century. These events signalized the 25th day of December and made it a period of sufficient importance to lead the early Christians to suppose it must have been the birthday of their Messiah. Moshem, however, confesses that the day or the year in which it happened, quote, has not been fixed with certainty, notwithstanding the profound researchers of the learned, end quote. So that it is still an open question as to when Christ was born. What day of the month, what year, or what century it took place in is still unknown. This circumstances is, as before suggested, sufficiently of itself to utterly prostrate all faith in the divine claims for Jesus Christ. What would be thought of a witness who should testify in court to the truth of an occurrence of which he did not know the year or even the century in which it took place, or who could come no nearer than 133 years in fixing or guessing at the time? Would this court accept such testimony? I believe not. So that's the end of chapter 8 here of Kersey Graves' book called The World's 16 Crucified Saviors. And we're going to end it right now. Thank you for being here. Hope that this helps you to understand some little bit more deeper things that are being presented as I try to share different works that are from other writers that most people have never heard of. So thank you for listening. Again, this chapter tonight is called, that is not chapter, but actually the broadcast, is The World's 16 Crucified Saviors, chapter 7 and 8 by Kersey Graves. Thank you for being here tonight, and I wish you a good evening. Take care.